All right, let's talk about how to get your vocals to cut through in your mix. All right, so vocals are so central to how we process music, how we listen to music. It's one of the first things that many people latch onto when they hear a song. So it's really important to get your vocals sitting just right in the mix. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a few tips for really vocal mixing, but a lot of them are geared towards helping those vocals cut through your mix and sit within the mix in a nice way. And I believe I have 8 tips, 8 ideas that I want to talk about today. So it's going to be a quick list. So number 1 is tuning, and I'm not going to go into the details of tuning. This one is less about having your vocals pop out in your mix and more about having them not pop out in a bad way, right? So a lot of people are against vocal tuning, but the thing is that most of the songs that you hear that are professionally mixed will have a little bit of tuning on them. It's not always a ton of tuning. Sometimes tuning is used as an effect, but even vocalists that are insanely talented, the best vocalists in the world, we often put a little bit of tuning on them just to help it feel more polished. So I would not shy away from tuning. The more you use tuning as well, the more you'll develop your ear for what it sounds like when something is a little bit overtuned. You'll start to hear the artifacts a little bit better. You'll get a sense of which tuners you like the sound of more than others. They all have their own unique sound. And so the more you use it, the more you'll be able to spot if something feels overtuned, and you can then go in and correct at that one spot and help things not feel like they're overdone if that's a concern for you. Okay, so number 2 is actually what I call EQ puzzle piecing. And this is something that I talked about in one of my recent videos on using EQs, using EQ like an audio engineer. The topic was something like that. So basically what I like to do, and I think I might actually have an example of this on the vocal stem. Yeah. So what I like to do is I like to boost something around 3000 hertz, so 3 kilohertz. And then I like to boost the highs. So from like 10K and up, I like to boost that. Sometimes I do a shelf like this. Sometimes I do a bell curve. It just kind of depends on how it sounds and how I'm feeling. Everything with audio tends to be, it depends, right? But basically what I like to do is whatever frequency helps the vocals pop. These tend to be the frequencies that tend to help vocals pop, but you want to kind of like sweep it around and see what works the best for the specific vocalist that you're working with. I will then take these frequencies and I might cut them a little bit in other instruments to help the vocals pop out in that spot even more so, right? So the way I like to think about this, right, is you let the vocals and the instruments sit together a little more tightly in the other areas of the frequency spectrum, but then giving a little boost here and a little cut in the instruments helps it kind of pop out in that way that then it makes it a little more intelligible. It makes it have a little bit more of like that shimmer over the rest of the mix, over the rest of the elements of the mix. And it's something that I think is worth trying. And, let's see if I actually did it in this mix. Let's see if I did it on this instrumental stem. Yeah, so I did a little bit on this one. So I cut this 3000 range. I didn't cut the upper frequencies, right? The 10K and above, but I did give it, a complimentary little bit of a cut. And you'll see it's pretty subtle here. What did I do here? -1, right? And then on this one, what is it? +1 dB, right? And a lot of times I'll do these more subtle moves on the stems, but then on, the actual aux tracks for the instruments, I might be a little bit more extreme. So there's probably a couple layers of this. There might be like a 2 dB bump elsewhere, for example, and a 2 dB cut elsewhere. And again, it depends on how it sounds. So you do want to listen, you do want to think critically about it. Think about the moves you're making, listen to them, see if they make sense for that instrument, because depending on, for example, how you record the vocals, if you record the vocals with something that makes it a little too harsh and a little too present in the high end, you might want to do the opposite, right? It always depends on what your source material is. Number 3 is to use compression. And sometimes I'll do multiple layers of compression on my vocals. So the basic idea of what a compressor does is you're taking the loud stuff and you're bringing it down, and then you're taking everything. So here's the quiet to the loud, and you're bringing it up. And what that does is it brings those quieter details up. So the whole sound feels more present in the mix. It feels a little bit more boosted without having that upper range clip or distort, right? So that's the general way that we tend to use compression. There are other ways to use compression, right? A lot of times we will pick specific compressors just for the type of texture that they add or take away, the way that they affect the texture, the way that they affect the sound in general. There's so much that you can dig into with compressors, but I would just keep in mind that it's very common for us to have multiple layers of compression on vocals, especially depending on your style, right? Your genre that you're in. So I might look up, how whatever your genre is tends to compress something. And just keep in mind with something like a compressor, let me see, I'll just pull up a compressor here. I'll do the fab filter one because I know it has individual controls for things like the attack and release. But another thing to keep in mind is that if your compressor has something like an attack knob, for example, this is a great way to help your vocals pop out in the mix. So with attack on a compressor, what it's doing is it's telling the computer how long to take for the compressor to get up to speed, so to speak. So it's giving it a time frame, right? What's it right now? 0.25 milliseconds for this one, right? So if I set this to be slower, it's going to take a little bit longer for the compressor to kick into full gear. So when we set it slower, what happens is that initial transient snap, and the transients are the initial snap of the sound, the high frequency content of the sound. It's like you think about a snare drum, it has a ton of transients in it, right? So that initial snap of the sound is going to pop through. It's going to be allowed to pop through. It's going to have a little bit more time with a slower attack value to pop through and help those words, those vocals be a little bit more present in your mix, cut through the mix a little bit more. So if you are finding that you're not getting enough transients, you're not getting enough like snap or attack to the sound of the vocals as they're in your mix, then what you can do is you can set your attack value to a little bit of a slower value and see if that helps. And let's take a look at this. I'm not sure if I'm going to play this because this is a song that's not yet released, but you can see here I have an LA2A. This is a super common compressor for us to use on vocals. So this is a great one. I use this all the time on vocals. The hardware units of these, we use them in studios a lot. Almost every professional studio has one of these. Every big, major professional studio tends to have these. You'll notice that I have these vocals are going through bus 1, 2. Ooh, I didn't name my bus. That's so bad of me. Let's rename it. I'll just do lead vocals aux. So here's my lead vocals aux, and you'll notice I also have a 76 on here, and this is probably just catching the louder stuff and giving it a little bit of a boost. And it's the same idea. This one has an attack knob here. Keep in mind with this one, if you do use this one, the attack value is the opposite of what you would expect, right? So this is not a slower attack value than this. This is actually a faster attack value than this side. So it's the opposite of what you would expect with the 76 specifically. And this one too is another very common compressor that we use in the studio. There are the hardware units that people know and love that you probably have seen, very likely have seen. So I do have multiple layers of compression here. Sometimes I have another layer. You want to just listen and feel it out. And the idea of having multiple layers of compression is that you can set these settings differently and you can use different devices that lend a different tone to your sound, right? So usually when we're setting multiple compressors on something, we're changing the parameters a little bit. We might have one that's there to catch just a tiny bit of the louder portion of your vocals, and then we might have one that's kind of more consistently doing some gain reduction on the vocals the whole time, right? We might have one that has a slightly different attack value than the other. There's a whole bunch of different ways that we might use it. And it's basically like, you're using two different types of paintbrushes on your vocals. So that's the idea of using compression on your vocals to help them pop through. And hopefully there are some good tips in there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. So to help your vocals pop in the mix, another thing that I want to mention is the idea of how to use your reverb and the idea of using reverb. So one thing that I tend to do is that I will send my vocals to a room verb track. So that's my aux track that I have up here. And I have almost everything going to the room verb. And usually if I'm going to skip something going to the room verb, I'll skip stuff that's low end, like the kick or the bass. But often I'll put a tiny bit of those into the reverb too, because I kind of like helping those kind of feel like they're in the same room as everything else. And the point of this aux track, right, is that we take everything and we send it to the aux track, and then we have they all get summed together, and then they go down through our plugins, because that's how things work in Pro Tools, right? So it all sums together. It goes down through our, what do I have here? Vintage verb in this case. So it goes through this reverb, and since they're all glued together first, it can feel more like they're all in the same space, right? So this is what helps everything feel like it's in the same space. So I definitely do send my vocals through to this. Let's check that I did that here. So here's this. I did send them through. They're a little bit reduced here. Well, no, it is about the same level as what I have for them going into the mix. So I would send vocals to something like that. And then I also love to give vocals their own reverbs to help add a bit more of an effect rather than a practical, make it sound like it's in an acoustic space kind of situation. And one thing that I like to do with my reverb to help the vocals pop in the mix and to help it feel more exciting and interesting is I will, for example, here's my lead verb aux. This is one of my verbs. I might have another one. No, in this case, I don't. A lot of times I have a couple, but in this case, I just have one. So what I've done here, this is taking in bus 5 and 6. So I'm sending from the lead vocals aux out to this reverb. So all the different takes and the different tracks for my lead vocals, they get summed and sent through to this lead vocals track. They get kind of, glued together, so to speak. In this case, I think it's just one at a time. I don't think they overlap each other very much. But anyway, they get kind of glued together by this compressor. They get a little bit of texture and a boost from this compressor. And then they go out this bus 5 and 6 into this verb. And what I've done here, the reason why I have the verb as a separate aux track instead of just adding the verb onto this aux track is what I like to do is I like to control the sound on just the reverb. So you'll notice I have my reverb here and I have EQ'd this reverb. And so this is the Abbey Road technique, or it's similar to the Abbey Road technique. I don't always stick with the exact cutoffs that people tend to suggest for the Abbey Road technique, but I still think of it as the Abbey Road technique. We can fight about it in the comments if you want. But basically the point of this is, you cut the lows on your reverb, and that helps keep the reverb from muddying everything up. If you've ever struggled with adding a reverb and you're like, oh, I like this reverb, but it makes everything sound so muddy, try this. It'll really help. And then the other thing, the other end, what cutting this does is it helps let those clean vocals cut through in that mix, and you just get that reverby, spacey, vibey boost in that middle range. So this is something I love doing, and it helps those vocals cut through in the mix because you are preventing mud and you're helping that high-end cut through happen, right? A lot of times I will actually take this high-end cut, so this low-pass filter, this blue dot here, and a lot of times it's even lower. You want to just feel it out. You want to listen to it, move it around, see how it feels. But that's another way, controlling your reverbs is another way of helping those vocals cut through in your mix. And, another thing that happens sometimes, not as frequently for myself when I'm mixing, but you might enjoy this, is finding a balance of maybe you add one reverb like this on a separate aux, and maybe you add a little bit of another one that you mix in elsewhere, right? So you can do a combo of different things. I like to think about it as we're adding a bunch of layers of paint. Each paint layer might be a small detail. It might be a little bit of a change, but when you add it all together, you add all these little refinement movements that we make, it makes for a beautiful picture, hopefully. All right, and so another one that I want to mention, I have not actually done in this session, but it's the idea of adding parallel compression to your vocals. So people often add parallel compression to drums. I'm bumping my mouse over here, but let me see if I have it on here on the drums. I probably do. So here's my drum. Yeah, so here's a parallel compression track on my drums. And basically the whole idea of this is that I've added a compressor on here, and this compressor is cranked, right? So this parallel compression track gets the same content as this drum's aux track, and we're just crunching it with that compressor. And a lot of times we do add an EQ afterwards as well, just like we just did with the reverb. Different settings though, but just keep in mind that you can sculpt it with an EQ after the fact. But the basic idea is that you would do this on your vocals as well. So you would have your vocals aux here, and then you would also have another aux that has a compressor set to very extreme settings. So for example, with parallel compression, if I'm using something like this, a lot of times we use something like a 76 for parallel compression. It kind of depends on the type of sound you want to get. But what you want is if you're looking at the gain reduction for the compressor, you want it to be kind of like crunching the whole time. So over on this side of the spectrum instead of over here where it's just reducing by a couple dB, for example. So what we're doing is we're over compressing that. And the fun thing about that is what you do is you have your regular aux and then you have your parallel compression aux, and you blend the parallel one in to taste. And so when we over compress things, a lot of times you lose some of that attack, some of those transients that you want to keep, and what it would then kind of make it mushy in the mix, right? Over compressed in the mix. And so by keeping both of them, you have your version of your vocals that's cuts through a bit more, it has more dynamics, so you still have some dynamics, but when you're blending in that parallel compression to taste, you get a little bit more of that detail blended in. So you get a little bit of the best of both worlds. You get that cut through, and you get that energy, and you get that dynamic shift, and then you get some more detail pushed in there with the parallel compression track. So I would definitely try that on your vocals. I didn't do it because of the style of this song. Here, I can play this song for you, actually. Let me play it for a second.
I'll try my hardest to explain. My friends keep saying.
So this is not released yet, but it's going to be a Clance and Imes song. I'm trying not to get called on copyright by myself, on myself, if that makes sense. So yeah, parallel compression, try it on your vocals, see if you like it. You can always just add a tiny bit in. You don't have to go overboard with it, right? Just use your ear and feel it out. Now, the other thing that I really like doing, and maybe I'll just add it here really quick, is I like adding saturation, just a tiny bit of saturation to my vocals to help them pop through. So one of my favorite ones is the PSP saturator. So I'm just going to throw this on here and I'm going to saturate a little bit. I'm going to go kind of towards her lower range here and see how this feels. Maybe around here. Maybe I'll saturate that 3000 range just because that was kind of popping on this clearly. And I'm going to bring up the amount a little bit here and I'm going to dial it in really quick.
I'll try my hardest to explain. My friends keep saying nothing can get through to your brain, but it's simple, baby. Look at me, look at you, we are not the same. Don't know why I put.
So let's listen. I have all my delays and reverbs. So let's listen with and without and listen for how the vocals pop out a little bit more with this on here.
I'll try my hardest to explain. My friends keep saying.
I'm gonna let that die down. I think it can be a very, very big difference and it feels like it pops out so much more to me, but it doesn't feel like it's oversaturated, right? And the thing to keep in mind with this is you got to watch out, like this beginning of the song is much quieter than later in the song. So I would definitely want to listen to this part later and make sure that this saturation is not too much for that section. Because I don't want it to feel like it's, you know, run through an amp or, you know, I don't want it to feel super distorted unless that's an effect you're going for, right? But this is a slightly different technique that we're talking about here. When I use saturation just to help it pop in the mix, I want it to feel like you might not consciously notice that someone actually put a saturator on it, but if you take it away, you can feel how the saturator was helping it pop, right? You can feel it kind of dive into the mix a little bit more than you might like. I might leave this on here and tweak it later. Okay, and the other thing that I like to do is I like to add like multiband compression or a dynamic EQ onto things. So a lot of times I will do that, for example, with the FabFilter EQ. Let me open it here. You can set it, for example, if someone has some harshness, a lot of times around 1K kind of annoys me. So what I might do is I might bring a dot down right there in a bell curve. Maybe I'll make it a little more specific. And then I right click and make it dynamic. And what I can do is I can play the vocals and I can look at where it's hitting and I can adjust the threshold accordingly so that it's bringing down that frequency when it gets a little too loud. And that's really nice because that way, you know, especially if you barely bring this down or if you don't bring this down by default, you're not actually reducing that frequency overall. You're just reducing it when it gets too harsh, when it gets too extreme. So I use this type of thing a lot when vocals have some harshness to them that we're trying to tame. I use it on other instruments too that often feel a little too harsh, like cymbals, for example, and you can kind of tame them that way. So you can do that with either something like this. You can do a multiband compressor or dynamic EQ. De-esser is like in the same family, right? It helps you cut some of that harshness. And yeah, I don't think these vocals need it right now, so I'm just going to take this off. But another one, for example, that I like is the MB that they have. This one's good too. And they have some presets you can go around messing with. Actually, I haven't looked at their vocal presets. Let's look. Presence and control. Let's see what it's doing. Ooh, yeah, that's really gonna yeah, so you can mess around with these as starting points, right? And kind of explore. This would help you kind of boost that low end, right? This might help you tame that mid-range that can feel a little like boxy and gross. And this helps you boost that range that helps things pop, right? But yeah, I would just listen and mess around with things and see how it goes. One way that I tend to do is I tend to do default. And then I'll be like, all right, well, again, right? Let's say it's the 1K that's bugging you. I'll bring that down and then I'll set the threshold accordingly and mess with it that way. It's the same idea, very similar idea. So that's dynamic EQ, multiband compression, the idea of compressing a specific frequency range. So let me just take this off. And then number 8, the final thing on this list is the idea of adding a short delay in parallel to your vocals. So let's see if I did this. I'm not even sure if I did this. I do have a delay on here. Oh yeah, no, this is a long delay. This is set to a quarter note. So let me kind of show you how I would do that. So let's say I create a new stereo audio track. I'm doing command and I did the right arrow and then the down arrow to get to stereo aux. I might as well name this right now. I'll do like short delay lead vocals. Let's do that. And so I have this here. Let me set this to the same output as the other ones. So this is going to Vox Stem. And let me set the input. So maybe this will take, what do I have going on here? Do I have 5/6? 5/6 was just sending to my verb. So I think I'll just use 5/6 for this example. I would want to check and make sure I didn't automate it or anything, because if I'm not sure, you know, it's good to check that you didn't automate it and you're not going to accidentally have like way too much of this effect later in the mix. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a delay. So maybe I'll add the H delay. That one's kind of fun. I'm going to do stereo. And what I'm going to do is, what I like to do for this is I like to have my lead vocals down the center usually. So see how they're 0, 0. And I do feel like 0, 0 feels different than hard panned left and right. In theory, both settings have the same amount coming out of both speakers, but it does feel different. So I would experiment with that and try it. I do prefer, if I want something right down the middle, like kick drum, bass sometimes, lead vocals very often, I will go 0, 0 on both sides instead of 100, 100. So I will leave the vocals down the middle here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this delay and I'm going to have it close to the middle, but not quite. So I might have it like 10 and 10. And the idea here is that I'm going to set this delay to a really short value, and it's going to be creating the delay left and right a little bit, but very close and behind those lead vocals. So I might do some EQing too to kind of set it back in the mix so it doesn't cut through as much as the lead vocals. And what that's going to do is it's going to thicken up the vocals. It's going to help them sound thicker. So I'm going to switch this to milliseconds. I'm going to make this very short value. And let's see how that feels. I'm going to make sure the dry wet's at 100%. And I'm going to bring this down. And let's listen. I'll bring it up and we'll hear the difference. Oh, and you know what I might do is I might do the high pass, low pass as well. So maybe I'll cut some of that and I'll cut some of this. And actually, let's make this super short.
I'll try my hardest to explain. My friends keep saying nothing can get through to your brain, but it's simple, baby. Look at me, look at you, we are not the...
So that's kind of extreme with that setting, right? But maybe I get to that point and then I bring it down slightly.
I'll try my hardest to explain. My friends keep saying nothing can get through to your brain, but...
So you just kind of mix it into taste, and what it's doing is it's going to help thicken things up because it's adding this slightly delayed version that's widening it a little bit and giving it a little bit of support from behind. So then I'm wearing my headphones, so I feel handicapped, but then I might EQ it, right? So I might do something very similar. I know I have high pass and low pass on this, but actually this is something that I've noticed, right? So I have high pass set to what? 286, 1.2K. Yeah, I think that's 1.2K.
I'll try my hardest to explain.
So see how this EQ is after the delay? So it's showing me what's coming out of the delay, right? And so there is a lot of content around the 200 range and above that, what was it? I have to remind myself, 1.2. So let me hit play.
I'll try my hardest.
That's a lot. So if I really wanted to like Abbey Road this and to help this not cut through and fight the lead vocals, right? I might, gotta get rid of that noise there. I might do this. And if I want it to be more transparent, I might make it 12 decibels per octave and kind of mess with it from there. And you'll notice like if you lower and raise these, it gives you a different slope. It's not a different actual slope, but it gives you a different corner of the slope is what I mean.
I'll try my hardest to explain. My friends keep saying nothing can get through to your brain, but...
So that's another idea that you can use to help bring those vocals out in the mix, help them pop, help thicken things. So that's my whole list. I hope this helps someone out there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you want help with the mix, please check out my website. It's CatoNoise.com. And I offer coaching services as well as production, mixing, and mastering services. So please check out my website. You can book a one-on-one call with me through the website. It's very easy. You just have to answer like 3 or 4 questions about your style of music and what you're trying to do, and then we can have a chat about your music and see what is the best path forward for you. And other than that, please check out my Patreon. It's patreon.com/CatoNoise. My patrons get access to additional content. We have a Discord server we're hanging out on. We have a book club that we've been running on the Discord server. There's some additional content on my website, as well as early release videos that I post to the Patreon page. So check that out if you feel so inclined. I come out with new videos every Wednesday, and thank you so much for hanging out. Okay. Okay. Oh, you know what I did recently that we can talk about? I got a portable SSD T7 hard drive. So these are the little external hard drives that I like to work off of. And I find myself having to buy one of these at least every single year. And the ones I've been running off of are 2 terabytes. It's the same thing, but 2 terabytes. And those have been working really well for me. I really like them. It's easier to manage. It keeps space free on your computer. And so I just work off these. All of my sessions are on one of these. And then I also back up to another version of these. So I have backups there and then in the cloud. So everything that I work on, I have 3 versions of, at least, sometimes more, depending on the client and where else we might want to put things. But yeah, I know the one that I'm currently working off of is getting close to the point where it might be full or start giving me trouble because it's getting close to being full, right? So I just went ahead and ordered this one. And I'm excited to see how long this one lasts because it's a 4 terabyte instead of a 2. Probably a little less than twice as long because I assume I might start having bigger files or something. I don't know. We're going to find out. Okay. I'll talk to you later. Bye.